Lamed Daled. We are still on Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis 33b, and the discussion is the way to squeeze grapes when they are tamei, so that the juice would remain tahor and not become tamei. As we mentioned yesterday, Rabbi Yochanan is of the opinion that the juice within the grape is mifkad pakidi. It is not actually a part of the grape, but because it's so wet, it's so juicy, that and the juice inside is actually like in a balloon. It's separate from the skins, and it isn't considered one entity. And therefore, when somebody touches, or something that's tamei touches the grape itself, if the grape has already been wet, so it's susceptible to the tumah, and the grape becomes tamei, that tumah would only apply to the fruit, meaning to the solids, but not to the juice, which is essentially just encapsulated within the grape itself. And in order for the juice to become tamei from the grape would have to have a full kibetza in egg size, which then could pass on the tumah to another food. But as we saw yesterday in the Gemara, since when it is exactly at a grape size, at an egg size or less, as soon as you squeeze it out, it's for sure going to be less, and therefore there's not enough substance to make the juice tamei. And so that's the way to squeeze tamei grapes, so that the wine would remain tahor, would not become tamei from the grapes, because you only have an egg size or less. And the distinction the Gemara made was that lechatchila, if you're going to set out, since it's hard to be exacting, always take less than an egg size. This way you know for sure that the wine didn't become tamei. If, however, you already squeezed it, if it was exactly at an egg size, so as soon as you squeeze some of the juice came out, so the grapes are less than an egg, and they will not be enough to give tumah to the bit of juice that came out, and at no point is it going to become tamei. Now, Rav Chisda disagreed with this statement of Rav Acha bar Avia, because he disagreed with the concept that the grape juice is separate from the grape itself. And Rav Chisda is of the opinion that the juice is not mifkad pakidi. It's not like a balloon just encapsulated in the grape skin, but rather it's mivla bali. It actually is absorbed into the grape. So really, as soon as somebody made the grape tamei, the juice inside there is also tamei. So this is about 12, 15 lines in, the second to last word. Amar le Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda said, and we're now beginning with Rav Chisda's challenge to Rav Acha bar Avia. Rav Chisda challenged and said to him, Man sayis lach le Rabbi Yochanan Rabbach. Who's going to listen to you or to Rabbi Yochanan, your teacher? These grapes are already tamei. Just because you squeeze them, what happened to the juice? How did the juice's tumah disappear? Again, because he's of the opinion that the juice is a part of the fruit, as opposed to what Rabbi Yochanan held, that the juice was really just encapsulated, but is separate from the fruit. Alma kasavar, so we see he holds mashka mivlabli, that the juices within the fruit are actually absorbed within the fruit. So as soon as the grape became tamei as food, the liquids in there as a part of the fruit are also tamei. So Rav Acha bar Avia challenged him and said, "What? You don't follow that opinion that the fruit is really just absorbed? The fruit is really just encapsulated in the fruit, and the juice is encapsulated in the fruit, and the juice really is separate. And when the fruit becomes tamei, the juice does not become tamei. You don't follow that idea." But it seems to be the meaning in a Mishnah, because we learned in the Mishnah, tamei meis shesachat. Somebody who himself is tamei, who squeezed a bunch of grapes, and these grapes were exactly at a kibetza. And we talked yesterday that the squeezing of the grapes in that case was where he didn't make the juice tamei itself by touch, because he used something to a non-tameable medium. such as a flat piece of wood or something to squeeze the grapes. So he's not touching the juice, but he had touched the grapes, and the grapes had been susceptible to tumah. Kibetza tahor, they will be tahor. Now, there clearly, on account of that, it's at a kibetza, and it doesn't squeeze out. As soon as you squeeze out some, the grapes are less than a kibetza, less than an egg size, and therefore they can't impart tumah to anything else. Now, iyam is b'shlema mifked pekidi. So if you say that they are encapsulated, the juice is encapsulated in the fruit, mishum hachitar, and that's why the juice is tahor. Eliyam is mivabli, but if you tell me that the juice is absorbed and a part of the fruit, amai tahor, as soon as the grapes became tummy, they too became tummy. So it seems pretty clear in the Mishnah. You can't argue with the Mishnah. He says, no, you're making a mistake. The grapes over here never became susceptible to tumah. It's not that these grapes themselves were tummy already. The scenario actually is that the grapes never became tummy because they never had a liquid on them, so they never became susceptible to tumah. Le'emes miskashri. When did they become susceptible to tumah? L'chisachit lehu. When he begins to squeeze them, and some of the juice of the grape comes out, and it makes itself susceptible to tumah because now some of the juice, which I want, came onto the fruit, and the fruit is now susceptible to tumah. And l'chisachit lehu batzal ishiyura. And at that point, it is too small to make itself tummy anymore, and that's the reason why it's going to be not tummy. The juice is going to be tar. It's not because the grape became tummy. However, the fruit, the juice within the fruit, is a separate entity, and therefore it didn't become tummy. Rather, even the grape itself never became tummy. But of course, if the grape became tummy, Rav Chis is of the opinion that the juice is a part of the fruit, and if the grape became tummy, so did the fruit, so did the juice within the fruit. And he says, and you have to explain the Mishnah my way. The Eloi Temach, because if you wouldn't say that Hadatani, what about this Brisa? That this is similar to gifting teruma of tutim va'anavim of berries and grapes, shenitma, that became tummy. That you can't do anything with it. You can't eat it. You can't use it as fuel. It's too wet to use as fuel. This does have a way to when you gift teruma, that's tameh. When you gift teruma, that's tameh of grapes. A gift of teruma, we say no. It's useless because you can't use it for anything. Well, actually, according to your understanding, Rav Acha bar Avia, or your teacher's understanding, Rav Yochanan, well, actually, the grapes do have a way to eat them. It's true, I can't eat the pulp. I can't eat the skins. But the fruit that's in there, anami isbe, this also has a way to eat it. Because because there's a way to eat it on account of that your idea. Since you, Rav Acha bar Avia or Rabbi Yochanan, hold that the fruit is actually just encapsulated in the grape, but it's actually separate. And when the grape became tummy, it did not make the fruit, the juice within it tummy. Well, then we have a great idea. This person who donated or gifted his teruma from tummy grapes, still usable to the kohen. He can't use it for fuel, and he can't eat the grape, but he can squeeze it in less than a kibetza, where since it's less than an egg size, the grapes won't make the juice tummy. And so he now can make wine out of it. So it's a great gift to the kohen. This is a proper teruma, a proper gift. So Rav is going to respond and say, you're right, that would be okay, but the brisa that says you shouldn't do this and can't do it is on account of another issue. You can't leave around fruit that's prohibited to be eaten, even though that the grape itself, the juice itself would be permissible. But you're gifting the kohen a food that he may not eat, and that's a stumbling block, because then if he eats teruma tamea, that's a severe prohibition, and so you can't leave that around. It's not because there isn't any use for the kohen. You're right that in potentially there's a way to create grape juice out of this in somewhat of a laborious way of taking less than a kibetza, which is a small amount, and squeezing it each one at a time. And so it's possible to do, but it's a big stumbling block. He may eat from it or may do it the wrong way. And then there's just going to be teruma tameh everywhere, truma that's tameh and prohibited to be eaten. So Abai says, really, is that a concern for us that in teruma that maybe somebody's going to eat something that's prohibited? But Tani, we learned that you can use bread of teruma that became tameh, or oil of teruma that became tameh, but pasav shemen shel teruma shenitmes, and you can use that as fuel in your fire. So you can the oils or the bread. Now, how does he have this around? Obviously, this is edible stuff, and nobody's concerned that you're going to eat that you're going to eat the bread, and even though that you've put in the fire to burn, but maybe it's a full loaf. Maybe you're going to eat some of the bread or the oil. Nobody's concerned you may take some of the oil and put it in your salad. So you see that even though that there's something that's prohibited to be eaten, such as bread of teruma that became tameh, or oil of teruma that became tameh, you're allowed to use it as fuel, meaning you kept it around and it's still there. We don't have to destroy it right away because we're not concerned that you're going to come to eat the teruma tameh. So why over here with these grapes are you so concerned that the kohen is going to come to eat it in a non-tahor fashion? And there is a way to make it tahor. You could squeeze it less than a kibetza. So the Amar Le, so Rava says, yeah, of course. There's a way to do it so that you immediately render it non-edible, so there's no concern that people are going to eat from it. Pas zarek lebene etzim, because you take the bread as soon as it becomes tameh and you toss it between your pile of wood for fuel. So nobody's going to eat from this because it's clearly it's clearly not edible. It's become dirty from the wood and from the soot, and no one's going to want to eat it. And this way you render it inedible so that you can keep around. But these grapes, where you want to make wine out of it, you're going to keep it in a way that actually is protective of it. And then somebody may eat the grape. Or you may end up making it wine with more than a kibetza, and then the wine's going to become tameh, and somebody may drink from it. Same is with the oil. Amalei pas zarek lebene etzim shemen shel truma ramile beklimos, and the oil of teruma that became tameh, you're going to put it into a dirty dish, and so nobody's going to eat from the oil in there, and it's there clearly just for fuel. So we have a machlokas between Rabbi Yochanan and Rav Chisda whether juice within the grape is mifkad pakidi. Is it just encapsulated but separate, and therefore it doesn't become susceptible to tuma? It doesn't become tameh when the fruit itself is tameh. And if you squeeze it with less than a kibetza, so that now you don't have enough fruit to make the juice tameh, and therefore the juice will retain its tahara even though it came from an already tameh, spiritually impure fruit. And Rav Chisda says no, that it is mivla bali, it is absorbed and a part of the fruit, and would become tameh when the fruit becomes tameh. And another discussion we had is whether you're allowed to keep a fruit around that's already tameh, teruma, tameh, where there's a concern that you may come to eat it, which is a prohibition. We are now about 7-8 lines from the bottom of 33b. Rami Le Gufa. So now this is the analysis of the statement itself. So the statement itself was you're allowed to use bread or oil of teruma that became tameh as fuel. Abaye stated in the name of Chizkiah, And Rav Amar, or Devei Rav Yitzchak Bar Marta, and Rav said the same thing in the name of the Academy of Rav Yitzchak Bar Marta. Amar Rav Huna in the name of Rav Huna, Lashana Lapas. This is all true if we're talking about bread itself. That may be used as fuel. But chiti, if you're talking about kernels of wheat, that actually it will not become disgusting by leaving it around, and then you can't eat. Why? Because maybe you're going to come to eat from the grains himself. Rabbi Yochanan Amar. However, Rabbi Yochanan says, even wheat kernels, you can leave around of teruma and use them as fuel because no one's going to come to eat it. Now the Gemara says, "V'amai? Why? Maybe it's going to cause a stumbling block. Somebody's going to eat from it." So the Gemara says, "K'da Amar Rav Ashi," like Rav Ashi said elsewhere. Now we go to 34a, Lamed Aleph Amud Aleph, b'shalikta me'ista, where Rav Ashi had said elsewhere that what they would do is that they would have it sit in water or cook it so that it became puffy and soggy, and it would become disgusting. So too over here, this case must be talking about. Rabbi Yochanan said that you can keep it around for fuel. We're talking about a case where you made it disgusting by making it soggy. And where did Rav Ashi say his halacha that it became soggy and therefore you're allowed to keep it around? On this teaching, the Amar of Avin Amar of Yitzchak, Abishol Gabel Shar Beis Rabbi Hayo. In the house of Rebbe, the household of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, there was a dough master, if you would, a baking master, whose name was Abishol. And they would buy cheap teruma tamea from the household, from kohanim that became because it became tamei, and they would heat up boil the water with these teruma with wheat kernels that became tamei, in order to make in order to make the food tahor. Even though that Rebbe was very strict, and even his mundane food he would not eat unless it was kept b'tahara. It was kept in a way that would be required for teruma. He would nevertheless heat up the water, or whether, in other words, cook and use fuel of teruma that became tummy, and he was not concerned that maybe the wheat kernels, which were tummy, are going to touch the dough. Now, so that was just a teaching about how they would do it, that they would acquire the truma tamea, the truma that the kohen can no longer eat, and they would use it as fuel. And it would tell us that Rebbe was strict for himself to only eat food that had never come into contact with tummy and tuma, so that this way his food was tahara. B'tahara ochel chulin b'tahara, even though it was mundane, he would eat it only if it was tahor. There's a level that Rebbe would keep for himself, and even though that's what the level of strictness they had in the home, Abishal would use this teruma tamei as fuel to heat food, to heat a pot, and he was not concerned it would touch. Now the question is, how did he bring this into the home? Why would he do this? There's a concern that these kernels that are teruma tamei may end up being eaten. Why was he not concerned about a takala, about a stumbling block? Amar Rav Ashi. So to this, Rav Ashi responded that they would get it from the kohen and immediately cook it or soak it, and so it became soggy, and no one would come to eat it. The Gemara now shifts gears a little bit in teruma itself to another halacha. Now the question is, if somebody took grains or foods and replanted it, it was teruma. It had been separated as the tithe, as the teruma for the kohen, and it became tummy. And now they replanted into the ground. So whether it's seeds that from a teruma fruit that became tummy and they put it to the ground, or it was a food that regenerates, such as they took an onion or some other root vegetable which you put in the ground, and it'll regenerate and expand and grow. Whether it retains its original status or it becomes new. Abaye bar Avin, Rabbi Chanina bar Avin, Tana Trumas Bei Rabba. In the Academy of Rabba, both Abaye, the son of Avin, and Rabbi Chanina, the son of Avin, learned in the academy, and they were learning the laws of teruma. Pagabuhu, Rabbi Bar Masna. Rabbi Bar Masna met them. Amar Luhu, and he said to them, Mayam Rita Betrumas the Beimar, in the academy of our teacher, what was said about Truma? In other words, what halachas did you learn? Amrule, Umay Kashulcha, they said to him, why, you have a specific question? Ask him. Amar Luhu, he said to them, Rabbi Masna said to them, I do have a question. Tanan, we learned, Shtile Teruma Shenitmu V'Shasan Tahar Melatami. Vasur Melechel. If you take fruit, or you take teruma that became tamei, and you plant it, the whatever grows from it, they are not tamei anymore. Okay, so they taharim milatame. However, asur melecha, but you may not eat them themselves. So it says v'chimi achad taharim milatame. If they're tar, meaning they can't cause tuma anymore, amay asur melecha. Why are they not? Why are they prohibited in to be eaten? So I don't understand the Mishnah itself. Is it that when you planted, it lost its tuma, it lost its status of sullied, non-pure teruma? Well, so then you should be allowed to eat it. And if you can't eat it, that means it still has its teruma tamei status. It's teruma that is tamei. Then it should make other things tamei as well.
Rabbi, I'm sorry. Position on the page again, please.
Sorry?
Position on the page again, please.
We're on 34A, about 12, 15 lines in. The first word of the line is lay. So, Amr lay, Hachi Amar Rabba. So they responded, this is what Rabba's teaching is. My asurin lazar. Of course, it doesn't mean that that the Kohen may not eat it. It means it's regenerated to a healthy status of teruma. It's teruma that was once tamei. When you planted it, it lost its tuma, so therefore won't make anything else tamei. But in itself is now pure and proper teruma. So a non-Kohen may not eat it. And that's what it means. So the Gemara challenges, well, that can't be. So what that doesn't seem like a chiddush. That seems pretty obvious because we already know this gidule teruma. You want to tell me that something that grows from seeds of teruma itself has the status of teruma? Tanina, that we already learned. Gidule teruma. That anything that if you take teruma seeds and you put it in the ground, the produce that grows from that is going to be teruma because it grew from teruma. And if you're going to tell me, no, it doesn't mean something that grows from the seed, but it's a fruit that it's a type of vegetable or a type of herb that expands or generates new bulbs. So you put in an onion and new onions grow or things like that. And if you talk about gedulin, my kamashmalan, badavar she'en. What chiddush is there? Are you telling me about that? She'en zarei kala, badavar she'en zarei kala. That it's something that the seed doesn't disintegrate, meaning what you put in remains, and just new bulbs or new fruit, root vegetables grow from there. Hanami tanina. That too has already been taught. Hatevel. Tevel is the produce prior to having separated the teruma, which is also prohibited to be eaten on account of that you have to separate teruma first. You have to separate the tithe or the gift for the kohen. Tevel, non-tithed produce, gidulav mutarim, that which grows from it is permissible if bedavar shazara kala. If it's something that the seed disintegrates and grows new. But when you plant something like a root vegetable, that the seed doesn't disintegrate and grow new, but rather the root itself just expands and creates new roots. Even if it's a totally new produce, asurin, it's going to be prohibited ba'achila, just as the initial. So ishtiku. So Abaye, the son of Avin, and Chanina, the son of Avin, were silent because they had understood that this teaching, this Mishnah, to be talking about the reason why it doesn't cause tumah because the tumah, once you planted it, the tumah left it. However, the reason it's prohibited to non-Kohen because it's real teruma and only a Kohen is allowed to eat it. That's the way they understood that Mishnah, but they realized there's no chiddush in that. The Mishnah wouldn't need to tell us that because both of these halachas that it could be teaching us are already known. That something that grows from teruma has the status of teruma, and something that that expands, or I don't know the word for this, when you put a root vegetable in and new roots come in, so you have multiple of the same fruit. You put in potatoes and potatoes grow, or whatever it is. So there, the main, what you planted remains, and new ones grow as well. The new ones also are going to be prohibited. So they said, okay, great. We're not sure what the meaning is. Amalei midish mielach. So they said to him, well, teach us. Do you have a meaning? Do you have an explanation of the meaning of this halacha? Says, yes, actually, I do have a teaching from Rav Sheshes, and I was wondering whether our teacher Rabba had a teaching, but here's what Rav Sheshes says. Now, indeed, when it says that when you took teruma, truma that had become impure, and you put it into the ground, and you planted it, it is not tamei anymore. It lost its tuma and can't cause anything else tuma, but it itself is tamei. What's the case? It itself is prohibited. Even the kohen may not eat it. There is a separate prohibition because of hesach hadas, and this offering is an idea that teruma needs to be guarded so that it can remain tahar and remain pure. Now it's true you took this onion, let's call it, or whatever it is that you put into the ground, and new roots grew. It is, however, it loses its tuma. It is, however, teruma. The problem is teruma must be guarded, and while this is in the ground, nobody's guarding it. There's no protection from tuma, and therefore it has a pasul. It has an invalidation because of hesach hadas, because you weren't protecting this teruma from becoming tamei, and that's a separate prohibition. That's a separate invalidation, not a prohibition, an invalidation on account of the hesach hadas, lack of watching it. Now, this idea that when you don't protect teruma becomes tamei, we're going to see now is a machlokas of what the basis for this invalidation. Rabbi Yochanan is going to tell us it's invalid because perhaps it became tamei. Now that's not going to be possible in this case because it's in the ground, it's not susceptible to tuma, and even the tuma that it had was lost because it was replanted. So it's going to, whatever grows is going to be valid teruma, and a kohen can eat it. However, Reish Lakish disagrees, and he says, hesach hadas, it's true, the reason for hesach hadas, for lack of protection of the teruma, is perhaps it becomes tamei, but it actually is an invalidation on its own. And the difference is if a prophet came, Eliyahu Hanavi came and said, look, I can't tell you halacha because lo b'shamayim, but I can tell you the facts of the matter. And the facts of the matter is nothing happened to this teruma. It never became tamei. Nobody touched it. According to Rabbi Yochanan, so then it would be valid teruma. It's not an invalidation. It's only a concern. We can't eat the teruma because perhaps it became tamei. Reish Lakish says no. It's an intrinsic invalidation. It's true, nothing happened, but you were required to watch it, and you didn't. That in and of itself becomes an invalidation. It's an intrinsic invalidation. So even if you get the information, you watch the replay, and nobody touched it, right? You have you have video cam on it, and nothing touched it. It's going to be invalid because you didn't have protection. Well, maybe the video would count as protection because you can watch it. But in any case, the idea is that even if you retroactively know that it never was touched by teruma, no teruma came into contact, and nevertheless it's going to be invalid according to Reish Lakish, just because of the lack of watching it, the hesach hadas. So Gemara says this idea that the reason it's invalid, the seeds that you planted of teruma tamei, the tuma part, the impurity leaves it once you planted it, but what grows is teruma. but it's teruma that you didn't watch, and therefore it's invalid, and a kohen can't eat it. So that would be fine if hesach hadas, this idea that you didn't watch it, is an intrinsic invalidation of the teruma. So it makes sense that even though that I'm sure it didn't become tamei because it was underground, nevertheless it's going to be invalid because you didn't watch it, and that's an intrinsic invalidation. But according to the opinion that says, well, actually, it's not an intrinsic invalidation. It's just a concern that maybe it became tummy, which would not apply in this case because it couldn't have become tummy. So therefore, it should be okay even to the Kohen, and that would not be and then we don't have a good interpretation of this Mishnah. So how are you going to explain this Mishnah according to Rabbi Yochanan? The Itmar, as we learned, it was said. Hesach hadas, this idea that if you don't properly watch teruma, it becomes invalid. Rabbi Yochanan says it's just a concern that maybe it became tummy, and if somehow we would know that it didn't, it's going to be okay. Rav Shimon Lakish is of the opinion psul haguf. It's an intrinsic invalidation. So therefore, even if you know that nothing happened to it, it did not become, no one touched it, it still would be invalid. Rabbi Yochanan says that it's just a concern that it became tummy, and therefore, if Eliyahu Hanavi comes and says, "Look, I can testify to you that nothing ever touched it that became tummy," it would not be tummy. Shimon Lakish says, it's an intrinsic invalidation. That even if Eliyahu comes and says, look, nobody touched this, it's tahor, they say, thank you very much, but its invalidation is not because somebody may have touched it and became tummy, it's rather because you didn't do your job and watch it, and so that's intrinsically an invalidation. Rabbi Yochanan challenged Reish Lakish by trying to prove that it's not an intrinsic invalidation, but rather a concern that it became tummy, and if we somehow know it didn't, it'll be okay. From this teaching, this is a brisa that Rabbi Shmuel ben Rabbi Shmuel, the son of Rabbi Yochanan, said, "Lul katan hayben kevesh l'mizbeach." The ramp up to the altar, to the mizbeach, in the outer mizbeach, the large one in the courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash, the ramp wouldn't go up directly to the mizbeach. There was a little gap. B'maravish al kevesh, on the south side of the this gap, there would be of the ramp. There would be the west side of the ramp. There would be a small area, like a hole in the side. There
was a ladder. There's actually a ladder there. They went down. They would go down there and clean it out.
In that hole, right? They had a ladder in there, but there was a little hole there.
Yeah.
Right now we're talking about the hole and what was done with this hole. So there was a hole over there. And they would drop into there, or any bird that was a sin offering that had become invalidated, they would put it in there. And it would have to stay there overnight, which would invalidate the bird, and then it would be burnt the next day. Now, and then it would be burnt. So what happened to this bird that there was a concern here? Now, if it's a concern, maybe it became tamei. So therefore, you could say that in its right now we can't burn it because it may be a valid korban right now. So we have to wait until it's there in this place overnight. And since it's there overnight, it became invalid, and then the next day you can burn it. And why would you not burn it right away? Because you just didn't focus on it, so you don't know whether it became tamei or not, and that's the invalidation. However, if the problem is that it became intrinsically invalid just because you stopped watching it, so then why can't you burn it right away? Why do you have to wait till the next day? If there is a concern, maybe it became tamei. Therefore, you can't burn it right away. You have to wait until the next day. Because perhaps somehow you're going to find out that it became that it wasn't tamei, that nobody touched it. So if you burnt it, and then you would have burnt the proper thing, such as Eliyahu comes and says, by the way, I want to give you the information that it is actually valid and no Tumah touched it. Eliyahu is psula guf. But if you, Reish Lakish, are correct, that it intrinsically becomes invalid once you didn't watch it properly. So even if Eliyahu comes and says, oh, by the way, you should know, no Tumah touched it, it doesn't make a difference. It's an intrinsic invalidation on account of that you didn't watch it properly. And so you can burn it right away because it's invalid carbon. Why do you have to wait till the next day where having been left overnight is an invalidation? Why do you have to wait till the next day? And we learned clearly, Zaklal. This is the general rule, and we're now on 34b at the top. Kol shepsule begufay. Anything that has an intrinsic invalidation, you saw it from Miyad, it can be burned right away. Bedamu babaylim, but if there's an invalidation in the blood, so the carbon itself, such as the blood spilled out, or there's an invalidation with the person who brought the carbon, the owner of this carbon, such as a carbon Pesach, where the person who brought it became tummy, and now you can't bring the carbon for him because you can't bring a carbon Pesach betuma. In both of these cases, the halacha is going to be that the invalidation is not in the carbon itself, but it's secondary to it and somehow elsewhere. And so therefore the carbon itself should be valid, and you can't burn it right away. You have to wait till the next day. And so you have to leave it overnight and then burn it. So, but what we see is anything that intrinsically became invalid, psula begufay, you can't burn right away. You have to wait till the next day. So if you're Reish Lakish, if you're correct that this is an intrinsic invalidation because you didn't watch the bird properly, the teruma properly, or in this case, the carbon properly, so why can't you burn it right away? You should burn it right away. You don't have to leave it to the next day. Amar Lei, so he said to him, Hi Tana Tana Devei Rabbi Barabu. Well, actually, there's a teaching, a brisa that was taught in the Academy of Rabbi Barabu, and this is in concurrence with that. The Amar, because that opinion says, Afilu pigel to an ibertsura. You always, even that is what seemingly would be the most intrinsic invalidation of a carbon, where you had the wrong intent. The intent was to misuse the carbon and in time and wrong place, which is an intrinsic invalidation in the carbon itself. Also, you don't burn right away. You wait for it to be overnight and only burn it then. So Reish Lakish has a good explanation of this and was able to deflect Rabbi Yochanan's against him and stands with his opinion that the invalidation of not watching teruma properly is not only a concern, maybe it became tummy, but it's intrinsic on account of your lack of watching it. Even if nothing happened, you didn't properly act with this teruma and invalidates it. Esav Esari is going to ask a challenge again. Nitma shenifsal abasa. If the animal, the carbon, became tamei, or it became invalid, or it was taken out from the courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash, which is an invalidation, it has to remain in. So Rabbi Eliezer says that the blood from that carbon less can be spritzed on the mizbeach, on the altar, that because of a general rule that we'll see later, that Rabbi Eliezer is of the opinion that you can spritz the blood of a carbon even if the carbon itself is invalid. So I can't bring the carbon onto the altar, but the blood, which did not become invalid, is allowed to be brought. Rabbi Yeshua says, "Lo yizrak," you don't spritz it, because as a general rule, if the carbon is invalid, the blood's invalid. If there's no blood, there's no carbon. They're linked to each other. However, Rabbi Yeshua agrees. She'im zorak, nevertheless, if you did spritz it, hurtza, it becomes valid. The carbon is accepted, and it works. So now, this is a general rule that we say that a carbon that was brought, betuma, that when there was an impurity of tumah on a korban and it was brought nevertheless, the tzitz maratze. The tzitz is the gold plate that the Kohen wore on his forehead and it had Hashem's name on it. That atones, the Torah says, it atones for tumah in the Beis HaMikdash. So this will make this would validate a korban that really essentially is invalid on account of that it was tummy when it was brought. Now, the tzitz works to validate tumah in a korban. So my nifsal. What would be the invalidation here that the tzitz, that Rabbi Yeshua says the tzitz is going to work for? Must be that the invalidation is that you didn't watch the korban properly, right? So if you tell me, like I, Rabbi Yochanan, say, that the invalidation is on account of that maybe it became tamei, so now it makes sense that the tzitz, the gold plate on the forehead of the Kohen Gadol is going to validate this korban on account of that the invalidation would have been tumah, and the tzitz validates a tamei korban. However, psula tumah have it. Haina the mishkachzo, the tzitz meratzi. The meratzi tzitz. That's why the tzitz would validate. Eli Amr's psula aguf have it. But you, Reish Lakish, you want to say that it's an intrinsic invalidation. It has nothing to do with it. Maybe it became tamei. The invalidation is because you didn't treat it properly, you didn't watch it, and that in itself is an invalidation. So why would the tzitz, the gold plate of the Kohen Gadol on his forehead, why would that validate this korban? It's not an invalidation on account of tumah that the tzitz usually can validate. This is just an intrinsic problem that you didn't watch it the way it's meant to be watched. Am I hurts the tzitz? So why does the tzitz validate it? It shouldn't validate it. The Gemara says, Reish Lakish responds, says, you've explained the invalidation here to mean not watching it, and therefore you have a problem. I have a different interpretation. When it says tumah, it means the animal became tamei, the korban became tamei. And when it says nifsal, it also means it became tamei. As you remember when we talked a few weeks ago about concepts of tumah, there's a level of tumah that it became tamei and can cause tumah to something else. That's called tamei. And there's a level of tumah where it itself becomes tamei but doesn't cause tumah to something else. That's called invalid. And one of the cases for that, a classic case, is that somebody had already gone to the mikveh, but the sun hadn't set. And then they touched something that still would cause kachim or teruma would cause tumah to it. So this is what happened here. And it caused tumah, but it can't, that now will not give tumah to anything else, and therefore it's just called pasul, invalid. My nifsal with Folio, what does it mean when it became invalid? It became invalid because is someone who gone to the mikveh that day, but the sun hadn't set, touched it, and therefore it became invalid. And so it makes sense that if you had spritzed the blood, the tzitz would validate it, because again, the tzitz validates anything that was brought, even though it was tummy. So Rabbi Yochanan challenges back and says, well, if that's the case, it's the same as the line beforehand, because it says if it had become tamei or it became pasul, well, pasul is tamei, it's just another term for the same thing. You're right, trei gavni tamei. It means two types of tumah. So we now have two interpretations of this previous brisa where it says that when you planted something that was tamei, teruma tamei, the tumah leaves, but it's prohibited. First, we wanted to say it's prohibited to a non-Kohen. Now we say it's prohibited even to a Kohen because it had become invalid because nobody watched it. And Be'ez Hashem, after Shabbos, we'll learn a third interpretation of this halacha.